All right. So once again, welcome. I'm Peter Atkinson. I'm Dean of the College, and welcome to the Student Success Centre. And you are in the showpiece of the Student Success Centre, which is this wonderful lecture theatre. And when I used to teach Biology 5A, this is where we would have instructions. And what's really nice as an instructor is that I can see everyone, even those of you sitting in the back row. And so if I remember my notes, and you can see that another advantage is that the presentation, if this was a lecture, is up above me, so I can be going in any direction and I can see what I should be talking off or explaining. It's good. And we think that it's also good for the students, because instead of being in a traditional lecture theatre, which is usually so much wide and very, very long, and so typically you're inevitably looking at the students in the front 6 or 8 or 10 rows, and not really deviating from that. Well, as long as I don't fall off the stage and make a fool of myself, I can probably keep doing this for the next 50 or so minutes. So this is an example of many of what we have at UC Riverside. There's a smaller version, I think, upstairs. We have a new building, which is the School of Business at the high end of campus, in what we call the old part of campus, where the original buildings of the Citrus Experiment Station still are. And these types of theatres are exactly what you as parents and taxpayers deserve for the instruction of your children and our students. And the campus leadership has been fantastic at getting money for these types of teaching facilities, even though California has been going through some pretty tough times in terms of the state budget in the years ahead of us, behind us. But as I said, I think in one of the groups I was in when we were in Campbell Labs, there's construction going on over there for a new undergraduate teaching laboratory, which will be open in, I think, 26, 27. Okay, today's speaker is Lucy Delaney. We have, yes, it'll come up, yes. We have 4 science lectures each year in our CNAS Dean Science Lecture Series. The first 2 were at our campus in the Palm Desert, and the final 2 are in Riverside, and today is the 3rd one by Dr. Delaney. And the purpose of these is to illustrate to the community the excellent science that's going on in our college. So Dr. Delaney obtained her bachelor's and master's at the City University of New York. She then, that was in molecular biology. She then moved to the University of Illinois at Chicago, where she obtained her PhD in evolutionary biology. And then she joined campus in January of 2022. And if we take our minds back to January, thereabouts of 2022, you may remember that we were recovering as a society from the pandemic, although we're still pretty much immersed in it. But instruction was starting again. So in a sense, I bring it up because she came at what one could describe as the worst of times to be starting as an instructor, a professor of biology in our evolutionary ecology and organismal biology department. And from day one, she had to be teaching to a campus that was rebounding. And when I say that, I mean not just the faculty were rebounding, but the students were rebounding, the staff was rebounding, and we had to rebuild, in a sense, the whole enterprise, as you did in your own lives. So she started at, I would say, perhaps the worst of times, but very, very quickly proved herself to be an outstanding professor and instructor in all things biology. And it's a privilege now to introduce her to give our science lecture series, one of the 4 for this year, to this audience. And without any further ado, I'm very proud to introduce Professor Lucy Delaney.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for that introduction. What Peter didn't tell you is that we actually taught together, and we went emergency remote, and I didn't even have access to the online software and anything like that. It was a crazy turnaround. So I teach mostly in our introductory biology series. I just want to get like a temperature on the room here. Can you give me, show of hands, have you taken undergraduate introductory biology in your life? Raise them proud. Okay. Thank you so much. That's very helpful. Can I see a show of hands of people who have maybe not taken a biology class in the last 10 years or more? Or ever. Let's go see where I'm at. Okay. Cool. That's helpful. Thank you so much. And then I must have some former students in here. Where are you? Okay, cool. Okay. Who's currently taking biology now? Okay. All right. I just like to get my hand on what we're dealing with here, because today I'm doing a grand experiment. What I'm really interested in is the process of sense making. How do we make sense of the world around us? And sense making involves a lot more than just someone telling us factual information. It also involves using that factual information to do something important, right? Or even to create meaning and purpose in our lives. How do we make sense of the world around us involves a lot of things that are often hard to explain and hard to quantify. And so I've decided today I have this population of people, that's you, I'm experimenting on you. And I want to try to get you with me to a place where I am trying to get my introductory biology students, before we like fall down the intellectual deep end of what is an organism. I'll tell you a little bit about the organism I know best. That's me. I think of myself as an organism. And when I came here to UCR, I came here specifically because I wanted to work in our introductory biology sequence. I think that's a really important place where we get a lot of fresh new students, and we have a wonderful opportunity to teach them something that will bring value to their lives. But I think, as anyone in this room knows who has taken introductory biology, often you are just hit with fact after fact after fact after fact that you must memorize, right? The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. PMAT, the steps of mitosis, right? Prophase, metaphase, anaphase, right? We memorize, and then we forget. And none of those pieces of factual information are actually bringing something tangible to our lives. And so when I say I'm interested in meaningful education, we're starting to get at it, and I hope by the end of this talk you'll understand what I mean. So I teach a class called Introduction to Organismal Biology. And when I first came to UCR, they asked me to teach this class. I am not an organismal biologist. I'm really more of a theoretician. I don't even really work on organisms. I work with computers. So I asked some folks for their materials, and I'm looking to see, okay, where's the definition? Surely an introductory biology class called Introduction to Organismal Biology has a definition of an organism. And I'm combing through everyone's slides, and I'm looking through the textbook, and I can't find it. And I'm like, that's odd. What's going on there? Why would it possibly be so hard to define something that seems pretty central to the study of biology? So when I was preparing for this talk, I texted my sister. I do this a lot. What do you think an organism is? I ask her questions like this out of the blue. She responds immediately, a living entity, which is not bad, but we're going to go further down this deep end. She says a living entity. Logan thinks it's like blood cells. That's my 6-year-old nephew. So I tell her there's no definition, and she hits me with, well, Google says there is. Okay, tell me what Google says. So here's what Google tells her. A living thing that can function independently. I'm going to just stop right there. For the purposes of this talk, I'm going to ignore the fact that we don't actually have a clear definition of what it even means to be a living thing, but that's the subject of a different talk. So let's skip that. And let's go to function independently. Inside my body, there are 10 times more bacterial cells living in me than my own actual cells. That's my microbiome, right? That microbiome is allowing me to digest my food. It's helping protect me from disease. Without all of that bacteria living in my body, I would surely die. And then, of course, there's the oxygen I breathe. I need oxygen in order to live. And where's that coming from, right? The photosynthesis mostly that land plants do. And then if we want to get like really technical, of course, there's like, I have to obtain matter and energy all the time, right? I need to maintain my ordered structure in a world that tends toward entropy. How do I do that? Well, I eat other organisms. So if I didn't have other organisms providing me oxygen, providing me matter and energy, living in my body, right, I could not live. So function independently, even for me alone, and we're not even getting into the messiness of some other organisms on this planet, right, it's hard to say. With an organized structure, okay, and the ability to grow, reproduce, and adapt. I certainly can grow. I know that much to be true. I can't reproduce on my own, and I also am not capable of adaptation by myself either. And we're going to talk more about what I mean by that. So this is what Google tells us. I would love to just like mic drop and be like, solved it, see you guys later. But this definition leaves a lot to be desired, right? And so we stop talking at this point. And then the next day she hits me just on her own is an atom and organism. Then she says, why do we have to put the parameters living independently in this definition? Not many things live independently on an interconnected planet. #one love. She's right. That's exactly what I'm getting at. Nothing on this planet functions independently. Not us, not any of the organisms we can see with our eyeballs, and certainly not all the ones we can't either, right? So there's something else here. And as scientists, what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to define terms. That's important to us. We want to be able to define terms so that when we talk to one another, we all understand what we mean. That's an important part of sense making. But biology is unique in the fact that biology stands for the study of life, and we do not have an agreed upon definition of life, of organism, of species, of consciousness. These things are very difficult to define, and we're going to talk today about why that's the case. But I want you to start thinking about the fact that humans like to make boundaries between things, this or that, alive or not alive, species 1, species 2. But so much of reality is a gradient. And so as human beings, we're like creating these arbitrary like lines in the sand. Okay, this thing's alive and this thing's not alive. But the biological reality is that those boundaries don't really exist in the way that we think they do. So we want to get to a place where when we say things with our mouth whole and somebody hears them, we all understand what we're talking about. We're all saying the same thing. That's part of the important work of science, but we're doing that everywhere, right? So I work in the department of evolution, ecology, and organismal biology. So I thought, why don't I ask some of my colleagues what they think an organism is? Because they've got to have an answer, right? These are people who have studied this stuff for decades. So I started with Dr. Kurt Anderson. He's our vice chair. He is a freshwater ecologist. He says, the definition I like to use is simply something that is capable of reproduction. This is, of course, the wrong definition. He's right. It is the wrong definition, I guess, in a sense, right? We don't really have one. But what I want to point out about this definition is that sometimes we just simply use things that have utility rather than having to worry about if we're exactly right. And that works for us a lot in science. I asked Dr. Samek, he's an evolutionary geneticist in our department, any weird little guy that reproduces and stuff. It kind of works. Like, we know what we're talking about, right? We're getting there. Okay. But neither of these people are organismal biologists. So then I thought, you know what? I should ask someone who actually like is an organismal biologist. So next I tried Dr. Holt. Whew, this one's a doozy. The highly individual expression of a genome through a whole lifetime that evolution can act on. It's a single bacteria in your gut, you and your whole gut microbiome, and every physical, social, economic, and political environment you have all ever been in at every precise point in your life. Okay, you know, when I first received this, I was like, oh, Lordy. And I hand wrote these slides, by the way. So I'm here like, my hands cramping. I didn't even know if I wanted to use it. And by the end of this, I was like, I think this is the closest one, actually. And maybe we'll see when we finish the talk where we all land. So finally, we have Dr. Ted Garland, who's a distinguished professor. He's quite famous. When I was interviewing here at UCR, I was like, oh my gosh, Ted Garland, his experiments are in the textbooks that I studied when I was in college. And so I asked him, another organismal biologist, who cares? I know it when I see it. So sorry to Ted, by the way, because I am paraphrasing a little bit. So if he sees this, sorry. But this is basically what he said. He was kind of like, why are you even asking me this? I got to go. He's my office neighbor, so I ask him questions like this all the time. Okay, so what I'm trying to demonstrate to you is that very smart people who actually work in this area and study these things that we think are organisms don't necessarily have a very clear definition of what this is. And today what I want to do is tell you what I think about organisms and do this experiment, okay? So I think organisms are cooperative, interdependent, overlapping biological systems that function at many continuous levels of scale. What would it take for you to meaningfully understand what I mean? Now, many of us in this room can read and speak English, so you understand the words that I've written here. But for me as an educator, when I think about what would it take for you to meaningfully understand this, there's a lot of things I want you to be able to draw from it. I want you to understand something about evolutionary history. When someone says to you, well, it's kind of a chicken or the egg problem, I want you to be able to say, well, the amniotic egg predates the chicken by millions of years. So actually the egg came first, right? We have an answer to that question. I want you to understand something about how, as much as life is presented as this thing that's competitive and survival of the fittest, dog eat dog world, it's really not. And all the increases in complexity that we've observed in life are largely due to organisms cooperating. And there's a long continuum between a single-celled bacterial organism all the way up to the biosphere that is really hard to separate, right? And I want you to really understand this stuff. And I think for me, when I was redesigning our course, don't worry too much about this. This is the story I want to tell you. And I'm going to try to tell you this story today. This is about the first 5 weeks of my introductory organismal biology class. We talked through all this stuff. And I wanted to challenge myself today to see, could I tell an audience this story and have you all kind of understand what I'm talking about in 5 minutes maybe. I don't know. We're going to see if we can do it, okay? And I have some facts I need you all to know. We're going to talk about these facts more, but I'm just going to lay them out for you. One of the ways that the human brain makes sense of things is you need to prime your brain a little first, right? So if you don't fully understand what I'm saying, I'm going to ask you to just trust me and follow me along on this journey, okay? All cell membranes are composed of amphiphilic molecules that have special properties. Cells are the basic unit of life, and there are 2 kinds of them on this planet. When an unstable chemical bond is replaced with a more stable one, energy is released. And electrochemical gradients generate potential energy. Bonus round, individuals do not evolve or adapt, only populations do. These are the facts I want you to know. This is the common language I want us to have so that we can fully understand the story that I'm about to tell you, okay? So I'm going to move through them kind of quickly, but I would love for you to try to follow along with me. And if you get lost, what I would like you to remember is each of these facts are largely taught in different classes when you go to college. The connections between these facts and why they become relevant in biology are often not discussed. And so imagine what it must be like for a student, right? Many of my courses consist of students who come from very different backgrounds with totally different prior preparation in the sciences, right? And this stuff it has to do with physics, it has to do with chemistry, it has to do with the construction of atoms, right? And ordinary matter in the universe. And you do kind of need to understand all this stuff and maybe some more things, right, to understand the story that I want to tell you. Okay. What we're getting at here is we're going to try to understand the past, right, the evolutionary history of organisms, so we can understand why it's so hard to define them today. That's what we're up to. We're going to start with fact 1. Okay. I'm going to challenge myself here for you guys. It's going to be okay. Don't worry. People are looking at molecules and they're like, no, chemistry. I feel it. And then there's probably 3 people in here who are like, chemistry. Okay. Polar. What do we mean by polar? Okay, really quick. Oxygen has this property where it like pulls electrons really close to it. Electrons are negatively charged. That makes oxygen kind of negatively charged, and the hydrogen's kind of positively charged. When you have a molecule that has a charge, negative, positive, right, we call that polar. That's what it means to be polar. Molecules that have charges interact with other molecules that have charges, because charges like each other. A nonpolar molecule, everybody's sharing those electrons equally, right? So we don't have charges. Nonpolar molecules like each other, because they're not charged, okay? Amphiphilic. We have a polar component to this molecule and a nonpolar, amphi, both, okay? So phospholipids, which is the thing that your cell membrane is made out of, are amphiphilic. Now, special properties. When you put them in water, they do cool stuff, okay? That's because those tails are nonpolar and they don't like the water. They turn in towards themselves. The heads are polar. They like the water. They turn outside, right? This is going to become important, trust me, for you to understand the story of how cells became more complex. We have to understand that these kind of little interactions between the nonpolar and polar parts allow a cell to be pretty flexible, right? We can bud off certain parts. We can remove things from the cell. We can uptake things in the cell, right? And these membranes can interact with one another. Okay, that's fact 1. Fact 2. Cells are the basic unit of life. All cells come from pre-existing cells. Where did the first cell come from? I don't want to talk about it. But all cells do now, today, come from pre-existing cells. And they have this phospholipid bilayer. They have a cytoplasm, which is just what we call the space in the middle. They have DNA, which is how we store genetic information. They have ribosomes, which express genetic information, right? We have a prokaryotic cell. It's a very tiny little guy, right? I tried to draw this to scale. It's not exactly to scale, but it's roughly something like this. If you can imagine, you have all these bacterial cells living in your body. The size between these 2 cell types, right? Bacteria are prokaryotic. They're very small. They just have their little membrane. They have some DNA and ribosomes. That's about it. Your cell, on the other hand, is much more complex. And a good way to think about it is it contains a system of interconnected membranes, okay? Remember how I told you that membranes are made of these special things that interact with each other and fold in on each other, and they interact in all kinds of cool ways? That's kind of what your cell is, an interconnected membrane. Okay, fact 2. Fact 3. Oxygen is this electron hog. So when oxygen binds to itself, it's very unstable. It is not a happy camper. It does not like to be bound to itself. Have you ever noticed how if you see a tank of oxygen, it says highly flammable? What do you think would happen if we tried to set some oxygen on fire? We won't do it. The fire marshal would not be happy. So that's combustion, right? And we take O2 and we replace that bond with a more stable bond. Energy is released. That's my interpretation of light and heat, by the way. I don't know. I'm doing my best with these slides. I'm not a very good drawer. Can you imagine if I was original artwork by me? It is, but I'm not bragging. Okay, one last fact. And then I swear we're done with the facts, and I'm going to just tell you the story of life on Earth, basically, as fast as I can. So this is a normal concentration gradient. You put some stuff in some water, like food dye. That's one we can all imagine. And if you just leave it there over time, it's going to spread out evenly over available space. Molecules spread out evenly over available space. I hope we all remember that. We call that diffusion. Okay. Now, let's imagine those molecules have charges. And you have spread out molecules with charges, so you have more positively charged particles on one side and more negatively charged particles on the other side. We can measure that in voltage. We've created energy by doing that. This electrical tension is the way you are staying awake during this lecture right now. It's the way like all your bacterial cells are obtaining energy inside your body. And it's pretty much the way every single living organism on this planet obtains energy, electrical tension. This is what we're all using. We're creating this thing we call an electrochemical gradient where the distribution of these charged particles is not the same on either side of a membrane. And we are using that now to power life. Pretty much all of us are doing it the exact same way. Okay, bonus round. I think we all know the answer to this intuitively. If I chop off my arm and then I have a child, will my child have no arm? You can answer, you guys. It's okay. No, right? My child hopefully will have an arm. The things that happen to me over the course of my life are not going to be transmitted to my offspring, right? And so when we talk about how a complex trait, for instance, like the limbs, appeared over time, no individual changed any of their trait to enable that to happen. What happens is we look at a whole population, right? And right here, we have this population. What I'm showing you is that everybody in this ancestral population has a slightly different length to their radius. Now, let's imagine that there's some like sweet kind of benefit to having a longer radius. I don't know, maybe you're able to grab more food. Who could say? But it's sweet. And what I mean by sweet is that you leave more offspring if you have that trait. And it's like a statistical certainty that if individuals that have a certain trait are leaving more offspring in a population over time, that's going to change the characteristics of the population. The individuals are not changing, the population is changing. An individual cannot adapt. That is a property of populations only. So we start with the ancestral amniote, right? That's where we get the egg, by the way. And that population splits into reptiles and mammals, birds up there, right? That's the chicken, right? And over time, over successive generations, based on this just natural variation that already exists in these populations, we will end up with quite a lot of changes. So sometimes it's like hard to imagine like, okay, all cells descend from pre-existing cells and we started with one tiny little cell and now we have like all the things that we observe on this planet today. How is it possible? Well, it took 4 billion years, right? And it was just like many, many, many successive rounds of this, right? Okay. I'm not going to get into the minutia of where the first cell came from. I literally teach an entire class where that's all we do. So we're going to just skip to the part where we had one, right? The first prokaryotic cells appear. These would have been small, simple cells, much like bacteria, right? When these cells appeared, there was not O2 in the atmosphere, okay? The atmosphere did not have oxygen for a couple billion years in early Earth's history. And we had these like little single cells all around kicking it. It was pretty cool. But we never got anything larger than that until cyanobacteria start producing oxygen as a waste product of photosynthesis. Now, all of a sudden, the oxygen in the atmosphere starts increasing a lot. And this is pretty cool because, as I told you, oxygen has a ton of available free energy in it. If you break that bond, you release energy. So now cells start becoming larger. How do they do it? Those phospholipids start interacting with one another and folding in on one another, right? And making the cell larger and larger and larger. And now we get cells that have this network of interconnected membranes, and we call that a eukaryote. It's bigger, it's got a nucleus, it has other membranes around it, right? Now, this eukaryote is very large comparatively to the smaller ones, and it's a hungry guy. It's got to eat. And so it eats other cells to live. And one time it tries to eat this cell, a bacterial cell that's capable of using oxygen to make ATP, the thing that we use to like do all the stuff we do, right? And instead of eating it, it like doesn't. Why doesn't it eat it? I'm not entirely sure. I don't think anyone is, but it doesn't eat it. They begin cooperating. And that thing, that bacterial cell that was able to make energy from oxygen is in your cell today, and we call it the mitochondria. The powerhouse of the cell was once its own bacterial organism living totally independently until it was engulfed by this larger cell. They formed the greatest crossover event in history, depending on who you ask. Okay. This happens again, by the way, later, where that little cyanobacteria who's pumping out O2 also gets eaten. That becomes the chloroplast in plants, for anyone who's studying this stuff is following along. But both of these things give rise to animals, fungi. Now these cells, these complicated cells with little bacterial cells living inside them, start clumping together on their own, right? And now we start getting cells cooperating with cells, becoming multicellular organisms. And this happens many times, right? But all life began in the water, and suddenly now we're thinking like there's land. There's a lot of opportunity on land, but you can't just like go on land because it's pretty harsh. There's nothing there. So now we have like bacteria, fungi, plants forming all these cooperative relationships that allow them to colonize land. And once they start colonizing land, animals are able to colonize land. And you can kind of imagine how this might have happened based on my very brief explanation of like how a limb changes over time, right? Okay. So this story that I just told you is the history of life on this planet, right? And this, I think, is necessary to understand partially why we say that organisms are so hard to define, because you have other cells living in your cells, right? Not to mention your microbiome and all that other stuff. Drawing the line between you and something else is nearly impossible, right? There really is no line. So we have organelles that in some cases were once their own organisms, and then cells and tissues and organs and organ systems and an organism. And then we have populations, and those make up species and communities and ecosystems and so forth. And what we want to do is say, here's the line here, here's the line here, here's the line here, but it doesn't really exist. Because even an individual organ is not operating independently, right? We are part of these systems that all operate in kind of interconnected ways. This is from the movie Brazil. It's not about the country Brazil. It's about bureaucracy. If you've never seen it, I recommend it. It's a very good movie about the pitfalls of enormous amounts of paperwork. So I want to talk a little bit about why it's so challenging in practice to teach the way we want to teach, right? And this is like slightly cynical, but I also think not wrong, right? The university has institutional goals, and individuals that attend university have goals. And sometimes those goals overlap and sometimes they don't. And I think what we want to gain from a university education as individual people, right? Ideally, to me, it's that top one mostly. Develop a sense of meaning and purpose. We all have to set forth into like our lives, and we all have to live life in a way that like allows us a sense of peace and happiness. And I'm going to argue to you today that a lot of how we do that is based on the stories we tell ourselves, right? So this is like, I found this picture. I don't even remember where I found it, but this is what lectures are like. You're literally doing this right now. I'm saying stuff to you and showing you slides. The only thing we're not going to do is a pop quiz at the end where I ask you all multiple choice questions. Unless you're one of my students currently, in which case study for your exam. They do actually have an exam on Monday, so good luck. This is like how college works for the most part, especially at large institutions. And this isn't because like universities are some evil place. Like this is because of the constraints of what we're trying to do. We want to offer an education to as many people, like anybody who wants it. We want to be able to offer it to them, right? But we also have the constraints of like, we can't hire everybody we want to hire. There's space constraints. There's all kinds of constraints. And I do this. I teach large lectures, and I'm not doing anything more special than this, right? For the most part. I would argue I'm like a little bit more of a ham about it, but this is what I'm doing. And it's what was done for me and what has been done for a very, very, very long time. But this is not exactly how we receive information best, right? So you experience the world, and you're having all these experiences right now, and your brain is forming these temporary links. And unless something tells your brain, hey, this is super important, you should flag this, it is gone like that. I'm sure many of you have this experience where like someone's talking to you and you're like, and then they walk away and you're like, crap, like what did they just say? Right? If your brain is like, that's not relevant, it's gone. Goodbye. Right? So this is my little thing. So I have a sack of like everything I told you about this entire lecture. You throw it away. But maybe you remember that the egg came first, right? Now, if you really want to remember that, you're going to have to associate that with existing knowledge in your brain. You cannot do this in a vacuum. You must have somewhere to place it. We call this process encoding. So if I give you information completely devoid of context, you have nowhere to put it, it's going to go, right? And when this process happens, right, encoding and consolidation is typically during sleep. And I'll tell you, when I was a college student, I studied like this. Oh my God, the exam's coming up. I should study the next day. Oh my God, the exam's coming up. I should study the next day. Oh my God, the exam's coming up. I should study the next day. Oh my God, the exam's tomorrow. I'm going to stay up all night long and study. And then I'm going to walk in bleary-eyed into class and take the exam as fast as I can. So the one thing I actually needed was sleep. And so one thing I didn't do, right? Now, part of this is like, sure, developing good study habits and stuff like that. I think we all need to hold ourselves accountable to the work we have to do to learn, but also the way we receive information, right, doesn't lend itself very well to the way that we're typically teaching in our STEM classes. So this is what I ask myself. Sure, it can be really hard to remember some stuff. I've had classes where I tell students every single class, water donates the high energy electrons for the electron transport chain in photosynthesis. And then the next time we come back, I say, hey guys, what donates the high energy electrons? And everyone's like, and I'll do it again and again and again. And it's not sticking. And it's not because like water is complicated. We all know what water is. Something else is going on, right? I also have students that will watch a single TikTok video and weeks later be able to like explain to me in very explicit detail every single piece of that video, right? And I know this to be true in my own life because sometimes people tell me about their jobs and I don't know what they do. I still don't know. Sorry, Dad. Like, right? But then like sometimes someone will be like, did you hear about Joey and like how he got caught and doing X, Y, and Z? Like, never going to forget. Going to remember forever. Right? So there is something going on where like your brain will sometimes be like, that's super important. I'm never going to forget that. And you hear it one time, right? And sometimes it takes a lot more work. And so how do we as university educators, right, enable someone to actually retain stuff like using this model, right? How can we do it in a way where you're like, remembering from class to class and even between classes? So my answer to this is that the entire human experience, the whole thing that we are all doing here is storytelling. That's what we all do. And we do it personally to ourselves, and we make sense of our own experience and the things that have happened in our lives. And we do it collectively, right? But what is telling your brain, hey, this is important and you should flag it for long-term storage is your feelings. Your feelings are providing you data all the time, really important data. And one of the like things I think about is like the memories that I have seared into my mind the best are often the ones where I was like embarrassed, where I did something obscenely stupid and a bunch of people saw me do it. And even like the feeling of like my face getting hot where I hit and being like, right? Once very early on at UCR, I ride a kick scooter. I slipped and smashed my face into the pavement. I was trying to be a show off actually. And I smashed my face in the pavement and I ended up delivering a lecture with a bloody nose like this. And I still remember the exact move I did that made my kick scooter go, and I will never do it again. I will never forget, right? So often what we do in school is we sort of divorce the emotional experience from the practical experience. There's practical aspects to learning, right? Oh, you need to study and you need to read and you need to do this and you need to do that. But what we often aren't talking about is the emotional labor required in learning. And also the fact that like the human brain is not really designed to memorize raw data. What we do is narrative, right? Knowledge is as much about like factual information as it is about how you actually think about those facts. There are so many facts that I have remembered and forgotten in my life, right? There are facts about biology that I should probably know and don't. I can Google a fact, right? What I can't do is like retrain my brain to think in a new way, right? Thinking is really the thing that we're after here. So this is from the mid-4th. I love this. This is a lecture. This is a painting of a lecture. This person here is reading at a lectern. This guy's sleeping. These ones are chatting. Literally, this is like my class today, except just like multiply this by 20, right? The thing that always gets my goat about all this stuff is people are like, the lecture model's horrible. Since the 4th century, look at this guy. What a snore. Nobody wants to listen to him. And honestly, who knows what he's up there reading? I don't know. Maybe it is really boring. But we watch people perform all the time. We do that constantly. I still remember to this day, the like first performance of Macbeth I ever saw, right? I was probably 12. That was a long time ago. I'm a lot older than I looked, but I still remember it. I listen to podcasts where people talk about stuff. I watch people perform monologues. We are able to understand what other human beings say and retain that stuff and be entertained by it and have it move us. Like we have the ability to do that. It's just that we're not exactly doing it in our classrooms, right? Human beings have traded and disseminated information by telling stories since as long as humanity has existed. There is evidence of storytelling before there's evidence of the written word. This is what we do. This is what we've always done. But somehow, like, in the mix of, like, a serious university education and, like, you know, providing the, like, most rigorous, like, you know, science to the young minds, like, we've forgotten how minds actually work. And if we want to educate as many people as possible, we'll have to start doing more of the, like, Shakespeare part of it and less of the like, I'm reading you a textbook. I always tell my students, I'm not teaching you right now. Right now, what I'm doing right now is not teaching. If I were going to teach you something, it would probably involve you and I sitting one-on-one and then me kind of showing you something and then you showing me and then me doing it more with you, right? That's teaching. This is performing. Totally different thing. And if you want to disseminate as much information as you can to as many people as possible, you have to do something else to keep them interested and to tell their brain, hey, maybe you should like remember this, right? The issue is we can't remember water, right? The issue is that that's boring and we don't care. So I'm classically behind time. Many of my students are here today and they'll be like, yeah. So I don't have a ton of time to tell you about the stuff I'm actually doing right now in the classroom. But a lot of my work, right, involves what I've been talking to you about this whole time. I don't think it's helpful to give students a list of characteristics that different organisms possess. I don't think that's super helpful. I think what's more helpful is to give students a framework to understand how to interpret the facts that they find about life on this planet. So, this is where we started off before. I'm so bad at drawing. I'm very sorry to you. I told you this was an experiment. Organisms, cooperative, interdependent, overlapping biological systems that function at many continuous levels of scale. I hope I've gotten you mostly here. But what I haven't talked about too much are systems. I'm going to touch on this briefly, but we're going to not touch on it as much as I had intended previously. So when I talk about a system, I'm talking about a bunch of parts that interact to produce some sort of functional whole. All right. So like a bicycle is an example. I think we can all understand this is a simple system. If I take this system apart and I look at how each component operates, I can predict how the whole is going to operate. There are other kinds of systems, though. Chaotic systems, weather. But what I really want to get at real quickly is a complex system. And what I'm going to tell you about consciousness is this. We cannot prove that consciousness comes from your brain. It could just as equally likely come from the universe, and your brain is tapping into it. Consciousness is very difficult because if I chop your head off and I take apart your brain and I count every neuron and I map all their connections and I look at the strength of their connections, what will that tell me about your conscious experience? Nothing. I won't know anything except the number of neurons in your brain and their connections and the strength of their connections. That's all I'll know. And that's because consciousness is not predictable, right, from the behavior of the parts. So what I'm aiming to give students is something that delivers the information to them in a way that our brains can receive and also provides a framework for how to understand the factual information we're telling them. So I grew up on PBS television, Cosmos, Magic School Bus, I was going to say Pee-wee's Playhouse, was probably not, but whatever. Anyway, television can bring together science and art, humor and pathos, and the countless lineaments of understanding into a single experience, right? There's a reason why TikTok is so popular. And my students seem to remember everything they see on TikTok. That's because we're storytelling in that way. We're telling each other things that we understand. We're touching at our emotions. We're providing meaning for the facts. So I'll just finish with this. This is what I'm working on as part of my research program. Is we've been funded to make That's Life, a television show about organisms. And the idea is that we are going to make episodes of television that students can watch, right? And then when they come to the classroom, we'll already have a base understanding of those facts in context. And now we can get more of that teaching work done. I just want to say, this is the last thing I want to say, because I do want to have a little time for questions, right? For me, having free access to information, having students excited and interested in STEM, retaining them, right, and providing this meaningful education is the work that I'm doing. But I think that stuff extends far beyond biology. I think that many of us will experience a lot in our lives, and some of those things hopefully will be joyous, and some of those things will be tragic. And the way that we make sense of the things that happen to us is by the stories we tell ourselves. And we can tell ourselves stories that empower us and enliven our experience in life, right? And we can tell ourselves stories that hold us back. I know for me personally, I told myself a story when I was in my PhD program that making mistakes meant that I was a bad person. That held me back a long time because you have to make mistakes to grow, to learn. That's part of what we're doing here, right? And telling myself a different story about what I was doing, changed the trajectory of my professional career. So I think this is bigger than understanding what an organism is, right? Because this gets at what we're doing on planet Earth as human beings. We're trying to have this human experience, right? We're trying to build relationships with one another, come up with a collective understanding of the way we look at the world and understand the world. And I think we can provide our students more, right, in how we can do this and how we can lead meaningful, purposeful lives than we do currently. So I'm going to end it there. I used a lot of images and stuff. They're part of the public domain, but if you're interested in any of the stuff I've used, you can go to my GitHub where I have images and references and all that. I really appreciate your patience and your attention, and I will open it up for questions if anyone has any.
If you have any question or which we talked about the ramp, your head question about it. That's not but he.
mention That's Life
Yes.
series you're working on?
Yes.
Is that like public?
Yeah. Thank you for asking me that, because it allows me to like talk up my TV show, as I didn't get a chance to do. So the question was, will the television show be publicly available? Absolutely. And it will be on YouTube. Yes. Yeah. With any luck, you guys can make me a YouTube star. I'm just kidding. Don't do that. I don't know. Can I just give them? I don't know. I don't want to mess with the system. Over here, yeah.
I know. I really appreciate you trying to look out for the students and how they learn how our minds work. Why do you think that so many other teachers and so many other universities utilize the lecture hall, the really sad way of reading out a textbook in more readable English? Why do you think that still exists if we can't function with that kind of teaching?
That's a really good question. And I want to give a lot of grace to the people who do teach that way, because there is a good reason. The reason is that when you obtain a PhD, that is a research degree. It is not a teaching degree, right? And so what you are doing when you get a PhD is you are positioning yourself for a career in independent research. You go to a university where you can open a lab, train graduate students, publish papers, get grants, right? Have you noticed I haven't said teach classes on here at all? So I think the idea was like maybe back in the day, oh, these are experts in their field, so surely they'll be able to step out and provide meaningful information to the students. But teaching and research are not the same thing. They're completely different skill sets. We do not train people who do PhDs on how to teach. If you want that training, you have to seek it out. And also, when your sort of files are evaluated, right? Like, are you progressing in your job, and are you going to like be promoted or move up or whatever? Often teaching is not given the same weight as the publications, as the grant getting. And so it creates a system where it's like, sure, I could spend all this time doing this, which, by the way, maybe I made it look easy, but this is hard. This is hard. To teach in this way is really hard. You have to like completely redesign the class. You have to think about it in a totally different way. You have to uncover some cool stories you can tell students. You probably should have some ability to perform, right? On top of now running a research lab, doing all these other things, et cetera. And so part of the reason that I am able to do this is that I am a teaching professor. So I'm expected to be in the classroom, and I'm expected to work on my teaching. And I think UCR has really recognized like the necessity to have people whose focus is the teaching, right? And so in the short time I've been here, we've hired more and more teaching professors who can take some of that stuff on. So, yeah, I don't know, probably it's complicated.
I think you sort of already touched on this a little bit in your answer to the previous question. As a student here at UCR, I have had plenty of professors who have taught in the way that we were just discussing, of very much the lecture, listening to a lecture and regurgitating information kind of style of teaching. But I've had your class, very lovely. I've had
Nice to see you again.
a handful of professors that are teaching in this way in something that is a little bit new overall, but also new to myself as a student, where it's like a storytelling based lectured kind of way of teaching. And I found personally that I am A, enjoying, but B, learning a lot more in these kinds of environments. And I have a feeling that is the same case to a lot of students. Do you think this is the trajectory of education in the future? Do you think this is going to be a much more popular idea of how to teach in the coming years? Or do you think it's maybe a little too out of our current?
I certainly would love to be like, yes, this is the wave of the future. So I'm going to give you a homework assignment. Go home and watch the movie Brazil. I love this movie, but part of it is about like institutional change is what you're talking about, right? And institutions do not change quickly. And even if every individual at that institution agrees that it should in fact change, and we are all like trying to make that change happen, it still can take a very, 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 very long time to observe it. So I think like I'm hopeful that yes, we are going to change the way that like teaching happens at the university. Probably not in my or your lifetime. I don't know. Yeah. It might take some time.
Okay. I know you talked about your students, so I'm just wondering like what kind of students you teach because I would like to be one.
Yeah. So I teach in our introductory biology sequence. So I pretty much teach anybody who's going to major in the life sciences. That's going to be biology, biochemistry, neurochemistry, cell and molecular, like all of those folks. Bioengineering, I think, also come through my classes. I typically get freshmen and sophomores. It depends on the luck of the draw, right? So these are large majors, but I exist pretty firmly in our introductory sequence. So yeah, hopefully I'll see you.
Thank you.
Yeah.